is one of the most challenging and frustrating musical skills that guitar players aspire to. It is such a frustrating and challenging musical skill that many guitar players just get so frustrated that they give up on it entirely. Now, I'm saying this as an experienced guitar teacher, teaching many private lessons, and I've talked to a great deal of aspiring guitar players. So I promise you when I say that, I'm not just kind of throwing stuff out there like some people on YouTube might do. That is my experience just from working with many guitar students. Speed is frustrating. When you're first building up your guitar speed, you're gonna find that most of the fast runs from a lot of the classic guitar solos are impossible to play. And any somewhat speedy runs that you're able to piece together yourself will sound cheesy and boring. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad or like you don't have any guitar talent or anything like that. Far from it. If you feel this way right now, you're not alone. Many other guitar players feel that way. I felt that way for a long time. Today, I'm going to show you a technique that really opened things up for me when it came to playing fast licks. And if you listen carefully, practice, and apply what I teach you today, it will open things up for you too, I promise. The technique I'm referring to is called the hammer-on from nowhere. It refers to when we perform a hammer-on onto a new string without picking any notes. The real benefit of this technique is that it saves you from having to move your pick to a new string, which is one of the most arduous things for guitar players when you're putting together these smooth sounding runs, is when the pick has to cross strings. It's not like it's just some lazy, like cheater way of playing fast or anything. The hammer-on from nowhere has a really smooth sound, and it actually opens you up to eventually be able to do more advanced picking runs as well. So today, I'm gonna give you 5 licks that incorporate the hammer-on from nowhere. Whatever your efforts in the past have yielded in regards to guitar speed, if you play and practice these and you work on them, your guitar speed is going to improve drastically. Let's dive in and have some fun with these. This first example is going to be the simplest of the 5 licks that I'm showing you today. It's going to essentially give us a repeating pattern that really drills our fingers into the hammer-on from nowhere technique. It does sound really good though, and I also end the lick with a bit of a bluesy flourish, just to show how this lick can fit in with some actual bluesy melodic soloing as well. Let's check it out. So this one is a relatively simple idea where we just have the repeating hammer-on from nowhere sequence on the high E string. I pick 10, hammer on to 12, pull off back to 10, and execute the hammer-on from nowhere by getting the 12th fret of the 2nd string. So it's a repeating pattern, and each time I'm picking the 10th fret of the high E string, I have a quick little, that's picking 10 on the B string, hammering on and pulling off to and from the 11th fret of the B string. It's getting kind of like the blues note. Then we finish with a couple of little blues rock sort of phrasing ideas, including a little choppy little staccato string bend. A fun sound to incorporate. This next example is kind of a classic pentatonic speed run. You'll hear similar speed runs in the solos of a variety of lead players, from the classic lead players of kind of previous eras up to even some of the more modern players as well. It has a really smooth sound, and it sounds extremely musical too. You can really repeat it a lot to build tension, and in this particular example, after building the tension with the hammer-on from nowhere sort of speed technique, I finished it off some really aggressive, raw, bluesy bends to cap things off. It's a little trickier than the previous example because it has hammer-ons from nowhere occurring on multiple strings. So definitely, if you're newer to this technique, I'd recommend you spend some time with the first example before diving into this one. That said, this is a great sounding one, and it is a great exercise in addition to a very musical sounding lick. Let's try it out. This lick starts on the 12th fret of the high E string, and I'm going to pick that note, hammer on from nowhere to the 15th fret of the 2nd string, pull off to the 12th fret of the 2nd string, and do another hammer on from nowhere to the 14th fret of the 3rd string. So To go back up that sequence, I do have to pick, again, I have to pick the 12th fret of the second string and then hammer onto the 15th fret of the second string. So, and that repeats several times. That's a little fast there, but gives you an idea of what kind of speed you can get out of this when you get this movement going. After I finish that pattern several times, I'm going to a high, sort of really aggressive blues rock bend. It's a full step bend. So it's a little tough to come from, and to get there, I'm kind of muting the B string. Like after I come out of this, I'm using a combination of my right and left hand to just silence the string so I don't get string noise. And I go straight into that high bend there, which gives a really aggressive sort of culmination there. This third example, it's a little bit inspired by Randy Rhoads. The lick uses essentially the D natural minor scale, but it adds in the flattened fifth, which we also sometimes refer to as the blue note or blues note. This was a classic soloing trick that Randy Rhoads used in a lot of his solos. And in this example, we use the hammer-on from nowhere to get a really fast, smooth, fluid, but still melodic sound. The speed portion of this lick kind of has two components to it. One is just a relatively simple repeating hammer-on from nowhere idea, and there's also a blindingly fast descending sort of speed run, which is a fair bit more challenging than the initial repeating hammer-on from nowhere idea. So you can of course learn this whole thing, or if you find the ending to be a bit too fast, you can absolutely just learn the main repeating pattern and just enjoy that and build up your speed with that way. But if you want a bit more of a challenge, there is that ending in there too. Let's check it out. This one starts with sort of a unison bend double stop idea. Very classic sort of blues rock sound. And then the hammer-on from nowhere component is this. So I'm picking 10, picking 10, hammering onto 11, pulling off to 10, hammering back onto 11, and then doing another pull off to 10. And then that blue note, I'm using my ring finger to get. You could also use your pinky. So really kind of chaotic, but in the right context, it sounds really melodic and cool. After executing that repeating lick a few times, essentially picking the 10th fret of the B string, hammering on from nowhere to the 13th fret of the G string, pulling off to the 12th fret of the G string, and again, these fingerings you could do with the pinky and ring too if that's more comfortable for you, and then pulling off to the 10th fret. I then pick the 12th fret of the G string, pull off to the 10th fret of the G string, and finish on the 12th fret of the D string. The last sort of ending to the speedy run is I pick the 10th fret of the G string, hammer on from nowhere to the 12th fret of the D string, pull off to the 10th fret of the D string. This fourth example uses the hammer on from nowhere in an ascending run up the strings. A lot of the examples have had a lot of a descending component to them, but this one ascends up the top four strings. It uses notes from the Dorian mode as well as the blues scale, and we're in the key of E minor with this lick. Another tricky thing with this lick is we're going to have some position shifts where our index finger kind of jumps back and forth between the 9th and 10th frets as we cross strings. So this makes it a great lick to practice your position shifts, as well as, of course, the hammer-on from nowhere in the context of an ascending run. There's also some nice melodic notes to kind of cap off the lick and show how this might fit in the context of an actual solo or improvisation. And the slower melodic notes are really based on the E Dorian mode. Let's check it out. This one gets a couple of our fingers going. We have this shape first, where my index finger's on the 9th fret of the 3rd string. I'm picking that note, and then I'm hammering onto 12, pulling off back to 9, using my middle finger. You could also do this again with the pinky and ring fingers, but I use my ring and middle fingers just because that's comfortable for me. Hammer on to 11, pull off to 9, and a hammer on from nowhere to the 11th fret of the D string. And next, I'm hopping up a string, and I'm essentially using more of a blues scale style of note choice. That's where I pick the 10th fret of the 2nd string, hammer on to the 12th fret of the 2nd string, pull off, back to 10, hammer on to 11, pull off, back to 10, and do a hammer on from nowhere to the 12th fret of the 3rd string. The last part of the pattern is I jump up to the 9th fret of the high E string with my index finger. So my index finger has gone from the 9th fret of the G string to the 10th fret of the B string and then back to the 9th fret, this time on the high E string. I'm picking the 9th fret of the high E string, I'm hammering on to the 12th fret of the high E string, pulling off back to 9, hammering on to 10, pulling off back to 9, and doing a hammer on from nowhere to the 12th fret of the B string. I finish off this lick with just some melodic phrasing where I'm bending this. Okay, so for this 5th and final example, I've got a pretty crazy one here for you. I wanted to throw in one that was going to be really, really challenging, give you something to build up to. This one's going to be based on the A blues scale, and it uses the hammer on from nowhere in a descending way. However, there are some relatively challenging fingering and stretches going on, even though we're playing just the blues scale, which is an easy scale, not always the case. These fingerings, while challenging, give us a really unique sound. You don't really hear the blues scale played in the rock genre in this way as often. Let's check it out. So we start off this example with some rock phrasing ideas. Then the fast portion of the lick that employs the hammer-ons from nowhere is in this position of the A blues scale. So essentially, I pick the 12th fret, hammer on to the 15th fret on the 2nd string out of nowhere, pull off to the 13th fret, hammer on back to the 15th fret, and then pull off back to 13. And then I do another hammer on from nowhere to the 14th fret of the 3rd string. Essentially, that's the pattern, and I just continue descending down the scale. So the next note that I do is I pick the 13th fret of the B string, hammer on first to the 14th fret of the 3rd string, that's the hammer on from nowhere, pull off to 12, hammer on back to 14, pull off back to 12, hammer on from nowhere to 14 of the D string. So far we have. It gets a little tricky at this next juncture here. The pattern continues, but I pick 12 on the 3rd string, hammer on from nowhere to the 14th fret of the 4th string, pull off to the 13th fret of the 4th string, hammer on back to 14, pull off back, and then I'm using my pinky to grab the 17th fret of the 3rd string. I then pick 13 on the D string, hammer on from nowhere again to 17 on the A string, pull off to 15, and pull off to 12. And then we finish with some more phrasing ideas along those lines. Okay, so that'll do it for today's lesson. I really, really hope you enjoyed these 5 ideas. I had a great time playing them and teaching them to you here. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, I really, really appreciate it if you consider liking the video or subscribing to this channel. Thank you very much for checking this video out. Stay tuned. I've got a lot more of this stuff coming your way, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.